They thought Earth had vanished, just a whisper drowned in the abyss. But silence was not surrender. It was the sound of something ancient awakening. Beneath the rubble, beneath oceans and mountains, humanity was building. Not to survive, but to return. And when we did, the stars would burn. No one remembered exactly when Earth fell silent. One moment we were screaming, protesting, begging the stars for mercy. And then the transmission stopped. The alien empires shrugged it off like a minor inconvenience. A spark snuffed out in the void. After all, Earth was a backwater, a primitive world they had barely bothered to catalog. We weren't a threat. We weren't even interesting. In the grand councils of the stars, we were written off as a failure of natural selection. They didn't realize that silence wasn't surrender. Silence was the strategy. It had started in the year 2171. When the first ships of the Kyrax hegemony cracked through Earth's atmosphere, they expected a people too weak to resist. They hit us hard, blasted cities into dust, enslaved millions, and stripped our oceans for their precious minerals. The survivors were herded into camps or left to rot in the ruins. The aliens thought that was the end of the story. But humans have a peculiar flaw. We don't break easily. Hidden deep underground, under mountains and ocean floors and crumbling subway tunnels and forgotten bunkers humanity built. We salvaged tech from the wrecks the Kyrax left behind. We dissected their machines, figured out their language, and understood their weapons. We copied what we could, innovated what we couldn't, and quietly stitched it all together into something new, something terrifying. The galaxy moved on, forgetting us. The Kyrax fleet moved on to bigger targets, richer worlds. Only a skeletal force remained in orbit. A token garrison meant more to satisfy political requirements than anything else. Arrogance insulated us. It gave us time. It gave us purpose. When the first of the Dreadnoughts broke free of the Greenland ice, it sent no warning, no proud broadcast, no declaration of independence. It rose from the ice like a leviathan, dark and silent. Plates of alien alloy stitched together with human stubbornness. The garrison didn't even notice it until it was too late. The Dreadnoughts' guns woke. They sang a song the stars hadn't heard in millennia. Pure, unfiltered rage. The orbital stations disintegrated under withering barrages of kinetic rounds and plasma lances. Their sleek Kyrax design crumpled like tin under the Dreadnoughts' fury. Their calls for backup were intercepted, jammed, silenced just as easily. Earth wasn't just surviving anymore. We were hunting. I remember standing on the cracked concrete of New Boston, watching the burning debris rain down from the sky. People cheered their fists, raised tears, cutting paths through the grime on their faces. It wasn't just vengeance. It was something deeper, a primal surge of hope, something we hadn't dared feel for generations. The first dreadnought was called Iron Requiem, a name chosen not by some commander or general. We didn't have those anymore, but by a mechanic who had welded the last piece of its hull together. A name whispered in bunkers, painted in blood-red letters across its armored flanks. We didn't stop with one. Within lunar cycles, 2 more rose from the jungles of the Amazon, stitched together by tribes who had once been thought lost to the world. Another clawed its way out of the crumbled ruins of old Shanghai. The dreadnoughts weren't clean-polished or pretty. They were brutal. They were monstrous. And they were ours. When the Kyrax realized what was happening, they panicked. They sent a distress signal out to the wider galaxy. They begged for reinforcements. But by the time the response fleets were marshaled, Earth was already bristling with steel and fury. The galaxy thought Earth was defenseless. They were wrong. We had been silent because we were preparing to scream. The message that Earth had risen spread through the stars like wildfire. At first, no one believed it. How could a broken, conquered world, a primitive species, strike back? The Dominion Corps, the self-proclaimed arbiters of galactic order, dismissed the early reports as isolated insurgencies. Some local governors even laughed about it. They called us a minor annoyance, a feral infestation. They weren't laughing when Iron Requiem and her sisters, Nightfall, Stormpiercer, and Black Warden punched through the Chirax main fleet like a fist through glass. They came expecting a mop-up operation. Neatly coordinated formations of sleek cruisers, carriers the size of cities, even a few dreadnoughts of their own. Real ones built with centuries of alien engineering. They thought numbers and technology would win the day. But humans, we didn't fight fair. We fought like animals with nothing left to lose. The battle over Earth wasn't a grand dance of strategy and honor like the Chirax were used to. It was brutal. It was messy. We unleashed everything we had. Hacked alien missiles, magnetic railguns firing chunks of urban scrap, jury-rigged plasma torpedoes so unstable they sometimes exploded before even leaving the launch bay. It didn't matter. The Dreadnoughts were designed to take punishment. No sane engineer would expect anything to survive. Nightfall took a full barrage to her bow and kept charging forward, engines bleeding, plasma guns still spitting death. Stormpiercer lost half her armor plating early in the fight, but used her exposed reactor core like a battering ram, slamming into a Chirax command ship and tearing it in two. And from the ground, from the shattered city, from the deep hidden fortresses, we launched wave after wave of attacks. Old ICBMs we had refitted with alien tech, hybrid fighters stitched together from F-22 relics, and stolen anti-grav drives. Even orbital jump troopers in crude suits patched together with desperation and genius. We didn't ask for surrender. We didn't give warnings. The Chirax screamed for retreat. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. It was over. When the last Chirax carrier burned up in Earth's atmosphere, raining molten wreckage over the Pacific, the survivors of humanity stood in the ruins, bruised, bloodied, and victorious. We had made our statement. Earth was not a slave world, not a forgotten colony, not a footnote. We were the storm. But we knew the galaxy wouldn't just sit back and let it go. The Dominion Corps was not a slave world. We were the storm. Earth wasn't just going to pretend this didn't happen. Earth was a stain on their perfect little empire now, a slap in the face to their authority. And worse, if we could rise up, others might too. We gave the galaxy an idea it could never kill, so we didn't wait for them to come. While they debated and plotted and sent scouts to probe the edges of our system, humanity was already building more ships. Faster, deadlier, crazier. We stripped every Chirax wreck down to its bones. We plundered their databanks, reverse-engineered their secrets, rewired their technology into brutal new weapons they could barely recognize. New dreadnoughts rose, dreadnoughts. Not the clunky, desperate monsters we had built at first, but true terrors, sleek and lethal, designed by human engineers who now understood exactly how to break alien tech better than the aliens themselves. We gave them names that echoed across the stars. Crimson Echo, Ghost Veil, Wraithfire. And behind every ship, every missile, every blade of steel, there was a voice whispering the same message. We remember. Every atrocity. Every city turned to ash. Every child was dragged away in chains. Every scream was ignored by a galaxy that had decided Earth wasn't worth saving. We remembered. And we were coming. The Dreadnoughts weren't just for defense anymore. They were our answer. They were our revenge. The Council's first real sign of fear came when the colony world of Ilarion fell. Ilarion wasn't just any world. It was a jewel of the Chirax hegemony, a glittering metropolis set against endless fields of engineered crops and oceans. Clear you could see the reefs from orbit. It had never known war. It had barely even known violence. It was a prize, a symbol of the Council's dominance and civility, a perfect world made by enlightened hands. We shattered it in a single night. The fleet that descended on Ilarion wasn't large. Barely a dozen dreadnoughts escorted by a ragtag swarm of repurposed Kyrax corvettes and frigates, now crewed by furious humans. We didn't bring diplomats. We didn't bring ultimatums. We brought fire. The first warning the Ilarionans got was when Wraithfire broke their orbital defense ring in half with a single volley. Massive shards of twisted metal rained from the sky, igniting the crops and setting the oceans boiling in places. Their governor tried to open negotiations, offered tribute, and offered surrender. We ignored him. Our ground forces deployed like a hammer blow. Dropships that looked like burning meteors punched into their polished cities, unloading soldiers and armored exosuits patched together from decades-old Terran tech and alien shielding. We didn't bother with withholding territory. We weren't there to conquer. We were there to send a message. Factories were gutted. Starports turned into smoking craters. Their food reserves, the pride of their terraforming, were salted with chemical fire. Broadcast towers were hacked to loop one simple message over and over in every language of the Council. Earth remembers. The civilians were spared mostly. We weren't monsters, but anyone wearing the uniform of the Syndicate, anyone holding a weapon against us, anyone who dared to call humanity vermin, they weren't shown an ounce of mercy. By the time we pulled out, Ilarion was a blackened, burning scar visible from orbit. The galaxy noticed. Suddenly, Earth wasn't just a minor rebellion. We were a contagion, a ghost, a nightmare whispered in council halls and military briefings. Recruitment on Outer Rim worlds plummeted. Slaves in the mining colonies began rioting, screaming human war chants in languages the Council thought they didn't know. We were a contagion. We were a ghost. We were a rising vengeance. The Const Owen's ladder. They dispatched the 12th Expeditionary Force, an armada big enough to crush most systems without breaking a sweat. Veterans, war-hardened admirals' ships that could level continents. We didn't face them head-on. Hitka's Helix Nebula, where the magnetic storms fried sensors and ionized weapons. We baited them, harassed them, sliced apart their supply lines, and dragged them deeper and deeper into the chaos. When the main fleet was helpless and blind, Iron Requiem and Black Warden hit them like wolves tearing into a wounded bull. In 3 days, the 12th Expeditionary Force ceased to exist. Their flagship, the Glory of Tyrex, was found adrift. Its engines gutted, its bridge crew slaughtered by boarding parties who left only one thing behind: a flag. Earth's flag, stitched by hand, fluttered in the stale, recycled air of their command deck. The Council's facade cracked then. They stopped calling us a rebellion. They started calling us something worse, a blight on galactic order, a species without restraint. The humans, the monsters who burn worlds. Good. We wanted them scared because fear, we had learned, was the only language they understood, and we were fluent now. The Dominion Corps had built its empire on fear, on the belief that order could be maintained with enough force and enough examples made of those who defied them. Their history was written in blood, in the crushed bones of those who had dared to rise. They had seen rebellions before, tiny, desperate things that sparked and died within a generation. They had never faced something like us. By the time news of Ilarion's fall reached the Council's inner worlds, panic was already setting in. Merchant guilds demanded extra military escorts at triple the cost. Border colonies whispered of secession. Slave revolts ignited like wildfire across the rim. Humanity wasn't just a rebellion anymore. We were an infection, one that was spreading through the rot the Council had long tried to hide. And so the Council made a decision born of pure terror. They activated the Verox Protocol. It wasn't a weapon in the conventional sense. No dreadnoughts, no soldiers, no fleets. It was a plague, a bioengineered virus, one that the Council had secretly created long ago for situations just like this. It was designed to spread fast and kill faster, targeting humans, specifically exploiting the tiniest quirks of our biology to make it unstoppable. They deployed it through Black Ops ships, sleek, near-invisible stealth craft that slipped into human-held territories, dumping canisters into the atmosphere before vanishing into the void. Their plan was simple: kill humanity not in battle, but in the shadows, quietly, efficiently, without the spectacle of open war. No blood-soaked fields, no heroic last stands. Just a slow, agonizing death whispered across the stars. The first signs came in the outer reaches. A mining outpost in the ruins of old Luna reported sudden sickness, coughing fevers, hemorrhaging. By the time anyone realized it wasn't natural, it was too late. Whole settlements went dark overnight. At first we thought we were finished. For all our rage, all our weapons, we couldn't shoot a virus. We couldn't outfight it with dreadnoughts. It was invisible, relentless, and it was killing our people by the thousands. I remember standing in the sick bays of Vengeance, watching rows of cots filled with men and women who had survived orbital bombardments, ground invasions, and firefights in the black, now brought low by something they couldn't even see. Some wept, some cursed, some simply lay there staring at the ceiling, waiting for the end. It should have broken us, but it didn't. Because humans, when cornered, don't just fight. We adapt. The Council thought we would roll over and die. They didn't understand that Earth's history was written in plagues and survival. From the Black Death to smallpox, from chemical warfare to nuclear winters, suffering was carved into our DNA. We moved fast. Quarantine zones popped up within hours. Every medic, every biologist, every half-trained chemist was drafted into the fight. Old medical research facilities, some buried for centuries, were dug out, reactivated, and staffed by volunteers. And from the ashes of our dying, we found a miracle. Not a cure, not at first, but something better. Resistance. Some of us didn't get sick. Some who did recover faster than we thought possible. Genetic outliers. Freaks of biology. Evolution in real time. We harvested blood samples, sequenced DNA with hacked alien tech, and within weeks we were able to recover. It wasn't perfect. It left scars, weakened lungs, twitching muscles, but it meant we didn't. It wasn't perfect. It left scars, weakened lungs, twitching muscles, but it meant it wasn't perfect. It left scars, weakened lungs, twitching, but it meant we didn't die. And once we knew we could survive, the rage came back sharper than ever. The Council hadn't just tried to kill us, they had tried to erase us like vermin. We couldn't forgive that. We wouldn't. The next wave of attacks was merciless. We hunted their Black Ops ships like wolves. We tracked down every Virox deployment vessel and ripped them apart with a vengeance that terrified even our own allies. No prisoners, no survivors. We found one of their main labs hidden in the asteroid belt of the Viralis Expanse, a fortress buried deep in rock, shielded from detection. It didn't matter. Black Warden tore the asteroid apart with orbital rail cannons, reducing centuries of research to molten slag in seconds. For every human they had tried to kill, we burned our own. 100 of theirs. Fear. They had only tasted the beginning. The Council wanted to erase humanity. Instead, they had forged an enemy that would never, ever forget. The Council's retaliation had been brutal, but it had failed. The Virox virus, their so-called ultimate weapon, had only hardened our resolve. And now the galaxy that once saw Earth as a broken ember began to whisper a new fear. Iron Requiem. We didn't just survive the plague. We adapted, evolved, and unleashed a war the Council had no idea how to contain. The Council worlds had always lived behind walls, massive orbital defenses, fleets, stationed in fixed patterns, confident that no enemy could ever reach so deep into their protected heartlands. Their arrogance had been their armor. Now it was their greatest weakness. We didn't launch conventional invasions. We didn't line our ships up for honor and ceremony like they expected. Instead, we slipped past their outer defenses using stolen stealth tech. We hacked their security nets, rewrote their patrol schedules, and corrupted their long-range sensors. We became their nightmares. The first world to fall was Malus Verge, a council breadbasket planet. It wasn't a massive battle, no heroic last stand or fiery fleet clash. No, it was death by 1,000 cuts. Small commando teams dropped from cloaked frigates infiltrated the cities at night. Power grids were sabotaged, food supplies poisoned, and communications blacked out. When we finally revealed ourselves, it wasn't with guns blazing. It was with an ultimatum. Withdraw from all human-occupied systems, or watch your worlds burn one by one. They didn't listen, so we set Malus Verge ablaze. Dreadnoughts descended from orbit, hammering the planetary shields until they cracked like eggshells. Once the barriers failed, we launched kinetic strikes. Rods of tungsten accelerated to near relativistic speeds. They hit with the force of small nuclear weapons, obliterating council garrisons and capital cities alike. We weren't just fighting for survival anymore. We were making sure no one ever forgot Earth again. Word spread faster than our ships could move. Worlds surrendered before we even arrived. Council governors abandoned their posts, fleeing in luxury cruisers while their citizens rioted and begged for protection. Some tried to form militias, but they had no training, no unity. They had been too comfortable for too long, and we had been forged in fire. Meanwhile, the council itself began to fracture. The weaker species, the ones who had only gone along with the council's rule out of fear, started questioning everything. Why die for an empire that couldn't even protect its own heartlands? Why obey leaders who couldn't stop a single primitive species from carving a path of fire across their worlds? Rebellions broke out in the Drask sectors. Slave uprisings toppled colonial governors across the Ghent Rim. Even some council fleets mutinied their crews, refusing to fight a war they knew was lost. The council leaders bloated, terrified aristocrats huddled in their fortified palaces, sending increasingly desperate calls for aid, for unity, for something that could stop the human tide. No one answered, because deep down they knew there was no saving them. We were not diplomats. We were not liberators. We were the consequence of centuries of cruelty finally unleashed. And still, despite the victories, despite the crumbling of their mighty empire, we knew it wasn't enough. Not yet. Because at the heart of the Dominion core was the world of Karen Prime, a planet so heavily defended it had never seen an enemy fleet in orbit, their true capital, their true pride. If we wanted to end the Council once and for all, we had to take Karen Prime. We had to show the galaxy that there would be no more mercy. The fleet gathered. Iron Requiem, Defiance, Wrath, Ashborn, Fury, Oblivion, and a dozen more dreadnoughts forged from blood rage and genius. Around them swarmed an armada of salvaged, cobbled-together warships, crewed by survivors, by warriors, by soldiers, by warriors, by humans who had nothing left to lose. We didn't broadcast a warning. We didn't offer surrender. We just set the course. And as we sailed into the black engines burning like angry stars, every ship carried the same message, etched into their hulls. Earth remembers. Karen Prime awaited. And so did our final reckoning. The final march to Karen Prime wasn't silent. Across every human ship, from the towering dreadnoughts to the battered frigates, still pockmarked with old battle scars, music blared through the corridors. Old Earth songs, war cries from a dozen cultures stitched together in a roaring chorus of defiance. Some sang, some prayed, some just sat quietly, sharpening blades or checking weapons one last time. Because everyone understood. This wasn't just another battle. It was a battle. This was the end of a war centuries in the making. Charon Prime loomed ahead, a jewel wrapped in armor. Massive defense platforms orbited it in tight formations, bristling with railguns, plasma cannons, and shield generators. Entire fleets patrolled the skies, sleek council ships gleaming under the light of their twin suns. Automated mines floated in thick belts around every possible approach vector. Charon Prime was the only one who could see. Charon Prime was the only one who could see. If Earth had tried to storm Charon Prime at the beginning of the war, we would have been crushed in minutes. But this wasn't the beginning. We weren't the broken, desperate remnants anymore. We were death sharpened to a fine edge. Our attack began not with a frontal assault, but with the unexpected. In the weeks before the final approach, human infiltration teams had slipped into the outer layers of the war. The Charon Prime Defense Network. Some were dropped from stealth ships. Others disguised themselves as council maintenance crews or slavers. Slowly, methodically, they infected the council's pristine systems with viruses of our own making, not biological this time, but digital ones. And when we arrived, when the first human dreadnoughts breached sensor range, the virus activated. Chaos erupted. Defense platforms turned their guns inward, misreading the council ships as enemies. Shield grids flickered and collapsed. Patrol formations broke apart in confusion. Communications jammed under an avalanche of false signals. Half the Charon Prime fleet didn't even realize they were under attack until plasma beams began shearing through their hulls. Wraithfire led the first wave, her prow cutting through the wreckage like a blade. Kinetic slugs the size of buses slammed into crippled ships, turning them into spinning molten wrecks. Boarding pods launched in thick volleys, slamming into station hulls and disgorging squads of armored human marines. Brutal, relentless, and armed with weapons designed for close-quarters slaughter. Charon Prime fought back, of course. The Council admirals weren't fools. Even crippled, their fleets were monstrous, and for every ship we destroyed, we lost 2 or 3 of our own. Some dreadnoughts went down in flames, surrounded and overwhelmed. I watched Black Warden, the dreadnought that had torn through the 12th Expeditionary Force, take a direct hit to her reactor and explode in a shockwave so bright it blinded half our fleet's sensors. We didn't slow down. We couldn't. The Council's flagship, the pride of Charon Prime, tried to rally a defense near the equator, where the shield network had been patched together at the last minute. It was a beautiful ship. Elegant, curved, plated in layers of silver and gold, a testament to everything the Council thought they were. Iron Requiem met it head-on. There were no speeches, no negotiations, just 2 titanic war machines tearing into each other with a ferocity that made the stars seem to tremble. We watched from every ship, every battered bridge, as Iron Requiem rammed the pride of Charon Prime at full speed, smashing through its armor, gutting it from bow to stern. Explosions cascaded down its length. Escape pods fired blindly into space, some shredded by debris before they could clear the wreckage. And when Iron Requiem drifted free, scarred and burning, but still alive, a cheer went up that shook the fleet. Charon Prime's skies fell silent. But we weren't done. Dropships poured toward the planet's surface. Human boots hit the ground in cities that had never known invasion. In the Council's great palaces, the senators and nobles who had ruled the galaxy cowered behind guards, praying that mercy still existed in a world they had taught only cruelty. It didn't. We weren't there to negotiate terms. We weren't there to sign treaties. We were there to end them, once and for all. The ground beneath Charon Prime had never known the tread of enemy boots. For centuries, the Council's seat of power had stood untouchable. Its marble towers and golden domes, symbols of their dominion over the stars. Even in their darkest wars, no invader had ever reached their homeworld. It had been unthinkable. Until now. We were bound by the enemy's power. We came like a storm. We came like a storm. As we withdrew, fires raged across the council cities. Statues toppled, vaults were opened, vaults filled with the treasures of a third world. We were the only ones left. 1,000 enslaved worlds. Some we took back, some we destroyed, some we left for others to reclaim, because we knew the galaxy had changed forever. Karen Prime was the final blow. But it wasn't just about revenge. It was about memory. Humanity would never be forgotten again. No longer the footnotes of galactic history. No longer the silent, broken species shivering in the shadows. We had carved our place in blood and steel, and no one would dare erase us now. The Council was dead. Its empire was shattered, and humanity, battered and scarred, stood alone beneath alien stars, free at last. During Solstice Tide, the fall of Karen Prime, the galaxy held its breath. The mighty Council of Nine, the rulers of 1,000 systems, the arbiters of law, the architects of centuries of oppression, was no more. Their palaces lay in ruins. Their fleets, once the pride of the stars, drifted as shattered wreckage. Their banners, once feared across the galaxies, were trampled underfoot and forgotten. And at the heart of it all stood humanity, bloodied, battered, and unbowed. We didn't immediately claim new territory. We didn't rush to carve out a new empire from the remains of the old. That wasn't why we had fought. We hadn't bled across 100 worlds just to become another council, another tyranny in different colors. We had fought for freedom, but we understood even in our victory that freedom was a fragile thing. The surviving council species, the ones that hadn't fought us, the ones who had either surrendered or sat the war out, approached cautiously. Emissaries, traitors, would-be diplomats flooded into human-occupied space, offering treaties bans. Apologies. Some were genuine. Most were terrified. They all wanted the same thing: reassurance. They wanted humanity to tell them that the storm was over. The monsters who had shattered the Dominion core were content now, that we would not turn our wrath on them next. We gave them no such assurances. Instead, we did something far more terrifying. We told them, we told the truth, in a message broadcast across every known channel on every frequency and in every language. Humanity spoke with one voice. It wasn't a speech filled with flowery promises or political cleverness. It was simple, honest, brutal. We are not conquerors. We are not rulers. We are not interested in rebuilding the galaxy you once knew. But we remember. We remember the chains, the whips, the camps, the silenced screams beneath alien suns. And we remember who helped and who watched. If you raise a new council, a new empire built on cruelty, on slavery, on the broken backs of the weak, we will return. We will burn it all again. This is our only warning. The message ended not with a declaration of leadership or a pledge of peace, but with a montage of the fallen council worlds. Images of burning palaces, shattered fleets, and statues crumbling into dust. It was a reminder, a promise written in the language of fire. The galaxy listened, and for the first time in generations, it understood humility. Across the former council territories, the old systems collapsed. Some planets declared independence, building new governments, free of their old chains. Others fell into chaos, struggling to survive without the iron grip of their former masters. Trade routes shifted. Alliances crumbled. Armies mutinied. New powers rose, some hopeful, some darker than anything before. And through it all, humanity watched. We didn't rush to interfere. We didn't sit in judgment. We had fought our war. Now the galaxy would have to fight its own battles. On Earth, the first real celebrations in living memory began. Cities rose from the ashes, not sterile council-styled structures, but messy, vibrant places filled with laughter, arguments, music, and life. Statues were built not to rulers, but to the nameless millions who had fought and died for the right to exist. Every year, the anniversary of Karen Prime's fall was remembered not with parades of soldiers, but with silence. A moment to remember what had been lost and what had been won. The Dreadnoughts, Vengeance, Wrath, Defiance, and the others were not retired. They were repaired, upgraded, and kept ready. Not because humanity sought new wars, but because we knew the truth better than anyone else now. Peace is never permanent. Freedom is never free. Somewhere out in the void, there was no peace. There was no peace. There would always be another tyrant waiting to rise. Another empire thinking it could treat sentient life like property. Another power arrogant enough to forget the lessons written in the burning skies of Karen Prime. When that day came, humanity would be ready. Not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as the sword waiting in the darkness, and carved into the hull of every dreadnought, etched deep into their armored bones. It was the simple phrase that the galaxy would never again dare to ignore. Earth remembers. And as the last echoes of war faded into the stars, a new purpose surged through our veins. We were not just survivors. We were witnesses. Custodians of a brutal history carved into our bones. Guardians of a vow that would outlive us all. On 1,000 liberated worlds, children asked why the sky once burned red. And on every one of those worlds, someone answered, because Earth remembered. Not with hatred, but with truth. And as we sailed once more into the black, ever watchful, ever ready, the galaxy knew if darkness rose again, so too would we. Not as tyrants, not as saviors, but as the storm that never forgets.